Most people think pantry bugs start with dirty shelves. A little flour spilled in the corner, a cereal box left open, a bag of rice folded once and pushed to the back, a few crumbs near the sugar jar. And sometimes, that is true. But old farmhouse families knew the pantry problem usually started long before anyone saw a bug. It started with storage. It started with air. It started with moisture. It started with paper bags, cardboard boxes, loose lids, warm shelves, and dark corners that nobody checked until something was already moving inside the flour. That is why old farmhouses treated the pantry differently. Not like a closet. Not like a place to throw boxes. Not like a dark shelf where food could sit for months and be forgotten. They treated the pantry like a protected room, because in an old farmhouse the pantry was not just storage, it was survival. Flour, cornmeal, rice, oats, beans, sugar, salt, dried fruit, crackers, seeds, coffee, tea, preserves. Everything a family needed to stretch through the week, the season, or the winter. If bugs got into the pantry, it was not just annoying, it was waste. It was money lost. It was food lost. It was work lost. So old farmhouse families had a simple rule. Do not wait until bugs are in the food. Make the pantry hard for bugs to use. That was the $3 pantry trick. Not a miracle product. Not a chemical cloud. Not a secret that needed a warning label. A simple system built around three things: glass, dryness, distance, glass to seal the food. Dryness to remove the moisture signal. Distance to keep food away from the hidden edges where bugs travel. That was the old pantry method. And the more you understand it, the more you realize how many modern pantries do the exact opposite. They store food in paper. They keep cereal in cardboard. They let flour dust collect on shelves. They stack bags against the wall. They keep potatoes near dry goods. They leave pet food in a torn bag. They store snacks in half-closed packaging. They let the bottom shelf become dark, warm, and forgotten. Then one day, they open a bag of flour and see tiny movement, or they find little beetles near rice, or small moths near oats, or ants running along the shelf, or webbing in the corner of a cereal box. And suddenly, the pantry feels invaded. But the old families would have asked a different question. Not, where did the bugs come from? They would ask, what were they following? That question changes everything, because pantry bugs do not appear by magic. They follow signals: food scent, moisture, warmth, darkness, cracks, open packaging, dust from flour or grain, a quiet corner where nobody looks. Your pantry can provide all of that without looking dirty. That is the part most people miss. A pantry can look organized and still be easy for bugs to use. A row of cereal boxes can look neat, but cardboard is not a fortress. A folded flour bag can look closed, but flour dust still leaks. A plastic clip can look secure, but scent can still escape. A dark bottom shelf can look harmless, but it can become a perfect travel line. Old farmhouse families understood this. They did not trust the package. They trusted the jar. The first time I saw the old pantry method done properly, I was inside a farmhouse kitchen in late summer. The house was quiet. The windows were open. There was a warm breeze coming through the screen door, and the whole kitchen smelled like wood, coffee, and dried herbs. Along the back wall was a narrow pantry. Not large, not fancy. No modern cabinets, no plastic bins stacked to the ceiling. Just wooden shelves, glass jars, metal tins, and a small cloth hanging from a peg. The old woman who lived there opened the pantry door and pointed to the shelves. She said, "Nothing sleeps in paper." I did not understand what she meant at first. Then she pulled out a paper flour bag from a box someone had brought her. She tapped the bottom. A faint line of flour dust fell onto the table. She said, "That dust is a dinner bell." That was the first lesson. Flour dust is not just mess. Rice grains are not just spill. Oat crumbs are not just crumbs. Sugar crystals are not just sugar. They are signals. Tiny signals. But insects live by tiny signals. A human sees one small spill and ignores it. An insect sees a path. That is why the old pantry trick started with transfer. When dry goods came into the house, they did not sit for months in weak packaging. Flour went into a jar. Beans went into a jar. Rice went into a jar. Oats went into a jar. Sugar went into a jar, seeds went into a tin, coffee went into a tight container. Pet food was kept away from the kitchen pantry or sealed properly. The package was not the pantry. The jar was the pantry. That is the glass part. And it matters more than people think. Glass does 3 simple things. It blocks scent better than paper. It stops crumbs and dust from leaking onto the shelf. And it lets you see what is happening inside. That last part is powerful. In a paper bag, a problem can hide. In a cardboard box, a problem can hide. In a dark plastic container, a problem can hide. But in a clear jar, the food is visible. You can see moisture, you can see clumps, you can see bugs if they appear. You can see when something is going bad, before it spreads. Old families liked that. They wanted food storage that could be inspected at a glance. A pantry that cannot be inspected is a pantry that can surprise you. And old farmhouse families hated bad surprises. Now, the $3 part of this method is not about buying an expensive system. It is about using a cheap jar, a reused glass container, a tight lid, a small brush, or a simple shelf habit that costs almost nothing. Old families reused what they had. Jam jars, coffee tins, canning jars, crocks with lids, metal boxes, cloth covers tied tightly when appropriate. They were not buying designer storage, they were protecting food. That is the difference. Modern pantries often look full but function poorly. Old pantries looked plain but functioned well. And pantry bugs care about function, not style. The second part of the trick is dryness. This is where many people fail. They think pantry bugs only care about food. But moisture changes everything. A pantry that stays slightly damp becomes more attractive to insects. A shelf near a sink wall, a pantry beside a dishwasher, a cabinet against a damp exterior wall, a basement pantry with humidity, a lower shelf near a floor that sweats in summer, a bag of food stored near a water heater or laundry area. These details matter. Old farmhouse families knew that dry food had to stay dry, not just mostly dry, truly dry. Because moisture wakes up problems. Flour clumps, sugar hardens, grain softens, cardboard absorbs dampness, paper bags weaken, mold risk increases, insects find the space more useful. That is why old pantries were watched for dampness. If a shelf felt humid, they noticed. If jars sweated, they noticed. If the bottom shelf smelled musty, they noticed. If a bag felt soft or damp, it did not stay there. Dryness was protection. A dry pantry is harder for pests to use. A damp pantry is an invitation. The old woman showed me the bottom shelf and said, "This one is the trouble shelf." She did not mean it was bad. She meant it had to be watched. The bottom shelf was closest to the floor. It collected dust first. It was darker. It was easier to forget. It was more likely to hold heavier bags. It was more likely to sit near cracks, baseboards, and wall edges. To her, that shelf was not extra storage. It was the first place a problem would start. So she kept it simple. No open paper bags, no loose grain, no food pressed into the back corner, nothing touching the wall if it did not need to. She left a little space behind the jars, not much, just enough to see, enough to sweep, enough to keep the shelf from becoming a hidden tunnel. That is the third part. Distance. Old pantry storage used distance in a way most modern people ignore. Food was not shoved into every corner. Bags were not pressed against the wall. Boxes were not stacked so tightly that no one could clean behind them. There was space. Small space. Useful space. Because bugs travel edges. They follow the back wall. They move along the shelf line. They hide behind boxes. They use cracks. They use darkness. When food is pressed tight against those edges, you make the bug path touch the food. Old families tried to prevent that. They created a little distance between storage and the hidden travel lines. A jar in the middle of a shelf is easier to protect than a paper bag shoved into a dark back corner. A sealed tin is harder to enter than an open box touching the wall. A clean shelf with visible edges is easier to monitor than a crowded shelf where everything hides everything else. That is why the old trick was glass, dryness, and distance. Seal the food. Dry the shelf. Keep food away from hidden edges. Simple, but powerful. Now, before we go deeper, There is something important to say. This video is for general education and old home knowledge. If you have a serious pest problem, roaches, termites, bedbugs, pantry moths spreading through stored food, dangerous insects, or any situation that may affect health or structure, contact a qualified professional and follow local safety guidance. Do not misuse pesticides. Do not mix products. Do not put powders, sprays, oils, or homemade substances near food unless they are specifically labeled safe for that use. If stored food appears infested, contaminated, moldy, or unsafe, do not eat it. The old way was not reckless. It was careful. That is the part worth bringing back. Careful prevention. Because prevention is cheaper than throwing away half a pantry. The first step in the old pantry method was inspection. Not cleaning. Inspection. Old farmhouse families looked before they moved. They checked the corners. They checked the bottom shelf. They checked the flour jar. They looked for dust trails. They looked for clumps. They looked for holes in packaging. They looked for tiny movement. They looked for webbing. They looked for moisture. They looked for signs before the problem grew. Modern homeowners often do the opposite. They buy groceries. They push new food in front of old food. They stack boxes higher. They forget what is in the back. Months pass. The pantry becomes a mystery. Then the first visible bug feels sudden. But it was not sudden, it was quiet. That is how pantry problems grow. Quietly. Behind the box. Inside the bag. Under the shelf lip. Near the baseboard. In the corner where flour dust collects. Old pantries fought quiet problems with quiet habits. A weekly look. A quick sweep. A dry shelf. A sealed jar. A little space behind storage. Nothing dramatic. But homes are often protected by undramatic things. The second step was removing dust. This matters more than most people realize. Flour dust on a shelf is food. Sugar dust is food. Cracker crumbs are food. Cereal powder is food. Rice grains are food. Pet food dust is food. The pantry does not need a full spill to become useful to bugs. It only needs enough residue. Old farmhouse families did not wait for a visible mess. They wiped shelves because even a fine layer of food dust could attract trouble. A small brush was often enough. A dry cloth, a clean rag, a little attention along the shelf edges. That was the 1-minute habit. Sweep the shelf line before it becomes a trail. Wipe the jar before putting it back. Clean the lid threads. Check the bottom of the container. Do not let food dust travel from one shelf to another. This is especially important with flour. A flour bag can leak without looking open. Every time it is moved, a little dust falls. That dust collects near corners. Then one day, insects find the corner. The old woman called it a dinner bell for a reason. Flour dust calls attention. So the old rule was simple. Do not let loose flour live on the shelf. Get it into a jar. Wipe the shelf. Seal the lid. Keep the outside clean. That one habit alone can change the pantry. The third step was rotation. Old families rotated food because waste was not acceptable. The older food came forward. The newer food went behind. Jars were labeled or remembered. Nothing sat untouched forever, unless it was meant to. Today, many pantry bugs get a head start because old food sits in the back too long. A half-used bag of oats, an old box of crackers, a forgotten rice bag, a pancake mix from last year, a cereal box nobody finished, a pet treat bag under the shelf. Time helps pests. Old storage systems tried to shorten the time food stayed forgotten. Not because they were fancy, because they were practical. If you use what you have, fewer things sit long enough to become a problem. If you can see what you have, you waste less. If everything is sealed, bugs have fewer chances. If older food comes forward, nothing disappears into the back. That is another reason glass jars worked. Visibility. You can see when the rice is low. You can see if oats are clumping. You can see if flour looks wrong. You can see if something needs to be used. A sealed pantry is not only cleaner, it is more honest. It tells you what is happening. Cardboard hides, glass reveals. That is old wisdom. The fourth step was separation. This is where many modern pantries make a mistake. They store everything together. Dry food, cleaning supplies, pet food, paper bags, cardboard boxes, onions, potatoes, snacks, canned goods, trash bags, sometimes even tools or household items. But old pantry logic separated high-risk items. Pet food did not belong open beside flour. Damp produce did not belong pressed against dry goods. Strong-smelling items were kept contained. Open snacks were not allowed to spill into staples. Cleaning products were not stored in a way that contaminated food areas. Everything had a place, not for beauty, for protection. Pet food is a major one. A big bag of pet food can attract pests if left open. It creates crumbs, scent, and oil residue. Old farm families understood feed storage very well. Feed attracts life, so it must be sealed, raised, dry, and kept away from human food storage when possible. Modern homes often leave pet food in a torn bag in the pantry or garage. That can turn the entire storage area into a signal. The $3 pantry trick says do not let one open food source weaken the whole room. Seal it. Separate it. Keep it dry. The fifth step was watching the pantry door. This connects to the doorway videos. A pantry door is a border too. If the pantry is near the kitchen, near the back door, or near a garage entrance, pests may move from one zone to another. Old families understood zones: kitchen, pantry, mudroom, cellar. Each had a boundary. The pantry boundary mattered because food was inside. Today, many homes have open pantry shelves or cabinet pantries with no real separation. That makes cleanliness and sealing even more important. If the pantry has no strong door, the containers must become the door. The jar becomes the wall. The lid becomes the lock. The shelf routine becomes the protection. That is why glass, dryness, and distance matter even more in modern kitchens. When the room has fewer boundaries, the food needs better boundaries. Now, let's talk about the pantry shelf itself. Wood shelves can hold crumbs and cracks. Wire shelves can let crumbs fall onto lower items. Painted shelves can hide fine dust. Deep shelves can create forgotten back zones. Low shelves can collect floor dust. Old farmhouse families knew each shelf had behavior. The top shelf stayed drier, but could be harder to inspect. The middle shelf was easiest to use. The bottom shelf was most likely to be ignored. Heavy goods often went low. Frequently used goods stayed visible. Food that could spill was kept contained. Nothing messy belonged loose. Again, this is not complicated. It is pantry common sense. But common sense disappears when nobody teaches it. So people fill shelves randomly, then wonder why certain areas attract pests. The old method gives the pantry a pattern. Frequently used sealed jars at eye level. Heavy sealed goods lower but not shoved into dark corners. No open paper bags. No leaking flour dust. No damp produce beside dry goods. No forgotten cardboard touching the back wall for months. No sticky shelf. No hidden food source. No mystery corner. That is how the pantry becomes less useful to bugs. Not by being perfect, by being readable. You should be able to open the pantry and know what is happening. If you cannot see the back of a shelf, you cannot know what is living there. If you cannot move a box without dust falling, you have a signal. If you cannot tell how old a bag is, it has been forgotten too long. If you cannot clean under the bottom shelf, it may become a root. Old pantries were not always bigger. They were often simpler. And simple is easier to protect. Now people may ask, what is the $3 item? It could be a jar. It could be a small brush. It could be a cheap sealed container. It could be a label. It could be a shelf liner that can be cleaned. It could be a clip used only for short-term storage before food goes into a jar. But the real $3 trick is not the object. It is the first layer. The cheap layer before the expensive problem. A few dollars spent on sealing and cleaning can protect far more food than it costs. But even without buying anything, the old habit still helps. Move old food forward. Wipe shelf dust. Dry the area. Separate pet food. Check the bottom shelf. Create distance from the back wall. Seal what you can. Use what is open first. Throw away what is unsafe. The pantry gets stronger with every small correction. That is why this method fits old farmhouse logic. It uses what you already have. It asks you to understand the problem. It prevents waste. It does not depend on panic. Now imagine two pantries. The first pantry looks modern. Boxes stacked neatly. Bags folded and clipped. Snacks in cardboard. flour in the original paper bag, rice in a plastic sack, pet treats on the bottom shelf, a few crumbs in the back, a little humidity near the lower wall. Everything looks normal, but scent is leaking, dust is collecting, cardboard is hiding spaces. The bottom shelf is dark, the back edge is untouched. Now imagine the second pantry, not fancy, just old-fashioned. Flour in a clear jar, rice in a clear jar, oats in a clear jar, sugar sealed, bean sealed, pet food stored separately, shelf edges visible, bottom shelf dry, no loose dust, no damp produce near dry goods. Older food forward. Everything easy to inspect. Which pantry is easier for bugs to use? The answer is obvious. Old families did not need perfect technology. They needed the second pantry. And many modern homes could have it again with a few cheap changes. That is what makes this topic powerful. It feels small, but it touches everyone. Everyone buys food. Everyone stores food. Everyone hates wasting food. Everyone hates opening a bag and finding bugs. Everyone wants the pantry to feel safe. The old method speaks to that fear and gives a calm answer. Do not panic. Protect the shelf before the bugs arrive. Glass, dryness, distance. And if you want the shorter version, seal, dry, separate. Seal the food, dry the shelf. Separate food from edges and attractants. That is the modern version. Seal, dry, separate. Say those 3 words before you close the pantry tonight. Seal, dry, separate. That is how the old pantry stayed ahead. Now, there is another old habit worth mentioning. Smell control. A pantry should smell like food only when food is open. If the whole pantry smells like cereal, flour, pet food, onions, or sweetness, scent is escaping. Old families noticed smells. If a jar smelled from outside, the lid was not tight. If a shelf smelled musty, moisture was present. If the pantry smelled stale, old food needed to be checked. If a corner smelled like pet food, crumbs were likely present. Smell is information. Modern homes often cover smells. Old homes investigated them. That difference matters. If you smell food in the pantry when everything is closed, something is not sealed. If you smell dampness, something is not dry. If you smell mustiness, something is being ignored. Your nose can catch problems before your eyes do. Old farmhouse families used that, not as a trick, as daily awareness. The pantry was opened, used, smelled, seen, touched, and maintained. A living space, not dead storage. This is why the old pantry did not become a forgotten cave. Someone was always rotating, wiping, filling, sealing, drying, or checking. Small contact prevents big surprises. That is true for almost every part of a house. The place you ignore becomes the place that surprises you. Ignore the roof and heat builds. Ignore the doorway and bugs enter. Ignore the sink and moisture gathers. Ignore the pantry and food becomes a signal. Old home wisdom is the art of not ignoring the quiet places. The pantry is one of those quiet places. Now let's talk about cardboard. Cardboard is useful. It is cheap. It is everywhere. But it is not ideal for long-term pantry protection. Cardboard can hold scent. It can hide small insects. It can absorb moisture. It can produce dust. It can create dark gaps between boxes. That does not mean every cardboard box is dangerous. It means old pantry logic does not treat cardboard as final protection. If a food will sit for a long time, give it a stronger boundary. A jar, a sealed tin, a proper container, a container you can inspect. This is especially important for dry staples. Flour, rice, oats, cornmeal, sugar, beans, pasta, cereal, crackers. These are pantry foundations. If the foundations are loose, the whole pantry becomes more vulnerable. Old families protected foundations first. That is smart. Do not start with the rare item you use once a year. Start with the food that creates the most dust, scent, or crumbs. Flour, sugar, oats, pet food, cereal, crackers. Those are the first targets. One jar at a time. One shelf at a time. One routine at a time. That is how a pantry changes. Not in one expensive makeover. In small practical corrections. Now, if you already have bugs in the pantry, The old method begins with a hard truth. You may need to remove unsafe or infested food. Do not try to save food that has clearly been contaminated. Do not just move it to another shelf. Do not ignore it because the package is still mostly full. Food safety matters. Once affected food is removed, the shelf must be cleaned. The cracks checked. The containers inspected. The source found. Then the pantry can be rebuilt with better storage. Old farmhouse families were careful with food because food was valuable. They did not waste it casually. But they also did not gamble with bad food. That balance matters. Protect food early so you do not have to throw it away later. That is the real savings. Not the $3 jar. The groceries you do not lose. The frustration you avoid. The infestation that never grows. The shelf that stays clean. The pantry that stays calm. That is why the topic belongs on your channel. It is not just about bugs. It is about recovering old household discipline. The kind that saved money quietly. The kind that reduced waste. The kind that made a home feel controlled instead of chaotic. Now picture an old farmhouse at night. The kitchen is quiet. The porch light is off. The door is sealed. The pantry shelves are dry. Jars sit in rows. The flour is sealed. The oats are sealed. The sugar is sealed. The bottom shelf is visible. There is no loose pet food bag leaning in the corner. No sticky cereal dust, no damp smell. No mystery box in the back. The pantry is not fancy. But it is hard for bugs to read. No open scent, no easy food dust, no dampness, no hidden dark pile of cardboard, no forgotten root. That is the point. A pantry does not have to be beautiful. It has to be difficult for pests to use. Old farmhouse families knew that. Modern homes can relearn it, and maybe nobody needed to hide this knowledge. Maybe it disappeared because it was too ordinary to sell. Nobody makes much money telling you to pour flour into a jar, wipe the shelf edge, keep the bottom shelf dry, and stop storing open pet food beside dry goods. There is no dramatic commercial in that. No monthly plan. No miracle promise. Just a habit. But ordinary habits protect homes. A tight lid. A dry shelf. A clear edge. A visible corner. A rotated jar. A wiped shelf. A pantry that gets checked before the problem grows. That is old wisdom. And it still works because insects have not changed. They still follow food. They still follow moisture. They still hide in dark edges. They still use cracks. They still exploit what we ignore. The only question is whether the pantry gives them an easy path. Tonight, check your pantry the old way. Not the way guests would see it. The way insects read it. Look at the bottom shelf. Look behind the boxes. Look for flour dust. Look for cereal crumbs. Look for loose rice. Look for open bags. Look for damp corners. Look for pet food scent. Look for cardboard pressed against the back wall. Look for old food you forgot was there. Look for anything that makes the pantry useful to bugs. Then do the 3 things. Seal. Dry. Separate. Seal the food. Dry the shelf. Separate storage from the hidden edges. That is the $3 pantry trick. Not a miracle, not a secret substance, not a war against nature. A shelf that stops feeding directions. A jar that protects the food. A dry line that gives pests nothing to follow. A little distance between the food and the root. The old families knew it. The farmhouse knew it. The bugs know it. Now you do too. And once you see your pantry this way, you will never look at a paper flour bag the same again.